A single mother's car breaks down near a Hells Angels bar, and then a Hells Angels silently rises. Sarah wasn't just tired, she was perpetually bone-weary, a state that had become her default setting ever since her husband left, leaving her with 2 kids, a mountain of bills, and a job that barely kept their heads above water. Tonight was no different. The clock on the dashboard of her ancient Ford Focus glowed a stark 11:47 p.m., a testament to another day stretched thin, another late shift at the diner scrubbing grease from counters and refilling coffee cups for strangers. Her youngest, Lily, had a persistent cough, and the doctor's visit meant dipping into the already meager grocery fund. It was a constant juggling act, a tightrope walk over an abyss of financial instability, and every single day, Sarah felt the frayed edges of the rope pulling tighter. The drive home was usually her only sanctuary, a brief interlude between the relentless demands of work and the equally relentless demands of motherhood. The hum of the engine, the familiar glow of the dashboard lights, the quiet solitude, these were small comforts she clung to. But tonight, even that sanctuary felt tenuous. The car, a faithful companion through countless school runs and late-night emergencies, had been making a strange, intermittent knocking sound for the past few days. A sound she'd tried to ignore, a problem she couldn't afford to fix. She'd turned up the radio, a desperate attempt to drown out the mechanical protest, but her anxiety had a way of cutting through even the loudest of rock anthems. She was miles from the city center, on a stretch of highway that twisted through a sparsely populated industrial zone before giving way to dark, unlit rural roads. The kind of place where streetlights were a luxury, and the only illumination came from the distant glow of the moon or the occasional passing headlight. The air was crisp, carrying the metallic tang of diesel and the damp scent of unseen fields. Suddenly, the knocking intensified, a rhythmic clatter that vibrated through the steering wheel and up her arms. Her heart began to pound in unison with the alarming sound. She instinctively eased her foot off the accelerator, her eyes darting to the temperature gauge, which was already nudging dangerously close to the red zone. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, cool against her skin despite the rising heat from the engine. Then came the sputtering. A series of harsh, guttural coughs from beneath the hood, each one a death rattle for the engine. The car lurched violently, once, twice, then a final, desperate shudder. The dashboard lights flickered, dimmed, and then, with an unsettling finality, everything went dark. The engine died, plunging her into an immediate, suffocating silence, broken only by the ticking cooldown of the engine and the frantic thumping of her own pulse in her ears. The car coasted for a few terrifying seconds, losing momentum, before finally shuddering to a complete halt on the shoulder of the desolate road. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, her breath catching in her throat. No. Not now. Not here. She tried the ignition again, turning the key with a desperate hope that bordered on prayer. The only response was a pathetic whirring sound, a weak, defeated groan from the starter motor. She tried again, then a third time, each attempt yielding the same dead silence, the same sense of utter helplessness. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up her throat. She was stranded. In the middle of nowhere. Almost midnight. Alone. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she pulled it from her purse. The screen glowed briefly, displaying a single red icon, low battery. Then it blinked out, plunging her back into darkness. Of course. She'd forgotten to charge it after the kids had played games on it earlier in the day. A wave of despair washed over her, thick and suffocating. She was truly cut off. No phone, no car, no immediate way out. She leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes, trying to quell the rising tide of fear. She needed to think. She needed a plan. But her mind felt like a tangled knot of anxieties, each one pulling her deeper into the abyss. She opened her eyes, forcing herself to assess her surroundings. The road was dark, an endless ribbon disappearing into the blackness ahead and behind. To her left, a dense thicket of trees loomed, their branches skeletal against the faint moonlight. To her right, across a narrow, gravelly verge, stood a dilapidated building. It was a squat, single-story structure, its windows dark and grimy, its paint peeling in long, ugly strips. A flickering, sickly red neon sign, half obscured by a broken overhang, cast a faint, pulsating glow onto the cracked asphalt parking lot in front of it. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she could make out a faded, hand-painted sign above the entrance. The letters were stylized, almost gothic, and beneath them, a crude, winged skull stared out into the night. Her blood ran cold. She knew that symbol. She'd seen it before, in news reports, on documentaries, in the whispered warnings of her youth. It was the emblem of the Hells Angels. The building wasn't just some forgotten roadside tavern, it was a clubhouse, or at the very least, a bar frequented exclusively by the notorious motorcycle club. A shiver, colder than the night air, traced a path down her spine. This was infinitely worse than simply being stranded. This was a nightmare scenario, a situation she'd actively avoided her entire life. Every instinct screamed at her to lock the doors, cower down, and pray that no one noticed her. She peered through the grimy windshield, her gaze fixed on the bar. A handful of motorcycles, large, gleaming choppers with custom paint jobs and chrome accents, were parked haphazardly outside. Their imposing presence seemed to radiate a silent, intimidating power. She could hear the faint, muffled throb of music, heavy rock, she thought, and the low murmur of voices, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter emanating from behind the dark windows. The sounds were distant, yet they felt menacing, alien. She was an outsider, a vulnerable woman alone in a place where she absolutely did not belong. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an alternative. Could she walk? How far was the next town? Her phone was dead, so no GPS. She had no idea. And walking alone on these dark roads at this hour felt almost as dangerous as approaching the bar. What about the kids? They were with her mother tonight, thank God. But she had to be back in the morning, had to be there for them. The thought of them, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to her terrifying predicament, spurred a fresh wave of determination mixed with profound fear. She couldn't just sit here. She couldn't just give up. She tried the car phone charger, plugging her dead phone into the cigarette lighter socket, but of course, with the engine dead, there was no power. The silence of the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the distant, unsettling sounds from the bar. She checked the fuel gauge, it was almost full. This wasn't a fuel problem, it was something mechanical, something beyond her understanding. She wasn't mechanically inclined. Her husband had always handled car issues, and now, it was just another burden she had to bear alone. The weight of her isolation pressed down on her, suffocating her with its reality. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like approaching footsteps. She imagined eyes watching her from the dark windows of the bar, though reason told her they probably hadn't even noticed a broken-down sedan on the far side of the road. Still, the paranoid thoughts persisted, fueled by fear and the chilling reputation of the occupants of that establishment. Her stomach churned with a mixture of cold dread and hunger. She hadn't eaten since a hurried sandwich at lunch, and the adrenaline coursing through her veins was starting to make her feel lightheaded. She glanced at the gas pedal, then the brake, then the steering wheel. She was trapped. Trapped by a dead engine, a dead phone, and a terrifying proximity to a place she wished didn't exist. There was no other option. Not really. The thought of flagging down a random car on this deserted road was just as fraught with peril, perhaps even more so. At least with the Hells Angels, there was a known entity, a certain, albeit dangerous, code. Or so she hoped. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had to try. For her children. For her sanity. Her hand hovered over the door handle, then retracted. What would she say? Excuse me, my car broke down, and I was wondering if a group of notoriously intimidating bikers could lend a hand? The absurdity of it was almost comical, if it weren't so utterly terrifying. She imagined the stares, the laughter, the sheer dismissiveness. Or worse. She pictured their hardened faces, their tattooed arms, the menacing glint in their eyes. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to stay put, to wait for dawn, to hope that a tow truck might magically appear. But dawn was hours away, and the cold was seeping into the car, making her shiver uncontrollably. Her gaze drifted back to the bar, scanning the motorcycles parked outside. Each one was a work of art, polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the faint red glow of the neon sign. She noticed a group of men gathered near the entrance, their backs to her, their distinctive leather vests emblazoned with patches she couldn't quite decipher from this distance. They were laughing, their voices rough and guttural, carrying faintly across the road. She watched them, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed help. She needed some kind of help. And they were the only visible source for miles. As she watched, one of the men detached himself from the group. He was a large man, even from this distance, broad-shouldered and undeniably formidable. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost ponderous. He turned, his silhouette briefly framed by the flickering red light of the sign. She couldn't make out his features, but his presence alone was enough to send a fresh wave of apprehension through her. He stretched, a casual, almost lazy motion, before reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a cigarette, brought it to his lips, and a flicker of light illuminated his face for a split second as he lit it. The brief glimpse was enough to confirm her fears, a grizzled beard, a stern expression, a palpable aura of authority. He took a long drag, exhaling a plume of smoke into the cold night air. Then, slowly, silently, he began to walk towards the edge of the parking lot, towards the road, towards her car. The large man's strides were unhurried, each step deliberate, as if he owned the very asphalt he walked upon. Sarah watched him, her breath catching in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He was a colossal figure, his frame filling her entire field of vision through the grimy windshield. As he drew closer, the details became terrifyingly clear. His leather vest, worn and scarred, was indeed emblazoned with the infamous winged skull patch, stark against the black. Below it, other patches, illegible from her distance, hinted at a long, violent history. His jeans were faded, his boots heavy, and a thick, silver chain glinted from his belt loop. His face, when he finally turned slightly, was a mosaic of deep lines and sun-weathered skin, framed by a grizzled beard that seemed to consume half his jaw. His eyes, though still obscured by shadow, felt like they were piercing through the darkness, through the glass, straight into her soul. There was no discernible expression, no hint of malice or benevolence, just a stark, unwavering presence that radiated an unsettling authority. He didn't quicken his pace, didn't call out, didn't even acknowledge her directly with his gaze until he was almost upon the car. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her palms slick with sweat. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to duck, to hide, to simply disappear. But she was trapped, a deer caught in headlights, utterly exposed. She could feel the heat radiating from him even through the closed window, a primal, masculine energy that was both terrifying and, in a strange, detached way, almost magnetic. Her mind raced, replaying every whispered warning, every news report, every stereotype about men like him. This was it. This was the moment her nightmare took concrete form. He stopped a few feet from the driver's side door, his towering silhouette casting a long shadow over the front of her Ford Focus. He didn't move, just stood there, smoking his cigarette, the tip glowing a dull orange in the darkness. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant throb of music from the bar and the frantic thumping of her own heart. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze, instead focusing on the worn leather of his vest, the intricate stitching of the patches, anything to avoid the direct confrontation of his eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he took another slow drag from his cigarette, then exhaled a plume of smoke that dissolved into the chilly night air. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, surprisingly calm, yet deep enough to vibrate through the metal of the car. "Problem, lady?" Sarah jumped, startled by the sudden sound, her entire body tensing. His voice wasn't aggressive, but it held an undeniable weight, a tone that brooked no nonsense. She swallowed, her throat dry, and forced herself to look up, her eyes finally meeting his. They were dark, shadowed, but she detected no immediate threat, only a weary, almost bored interrogation. "Why yes," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "My car, it broke down." She gestured vaguely at the dashboard, then at the hood, as if that would explain the entirety of her predicament. Her mind was a blank slate, every coherent thought having fled in the face of his imposing presence. He took another drag, his eyes scanning the front of her car, then the flat tire she hadn't even noticed earlier, now glaringly obvious in the faint light. He grunted, a non-committal sound that did little to ease her anxiety. "Engine dead?" "Completely," she managed, finding a sliver of her voice. "And my phone, it died too. No power." She felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her, laid bare in her helplessness before this man. He nodded slowly, not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the front of the car. He took a final, deep puff from his cigarette, then flicked the butt onto the gravelly shoulder, where it landed with a soft hiss and a tiny shower of sparks before dying out. He then walked around to the front of the car, his heavy boots crunching on the loose stones. Sarah watched him through the windshield, her eyes wide, every muscle taut. He leaned down, his massive frame almost dwarfing the hood of the Focus, and peered at the engine through the closed hood. He didn't try to open it, just observed, as if he could diagnose the problem through sheer force of will. After a moment, he straightened up, a slow, deliberate movement that made his leather vest creak. He walked back to the driver's side window, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans. "Nothing I can do from out here." "You got AAA?" She shook her head, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "No. I can't afford it right now." The raw honesty of her admission hung in the cold night air, a testament to her desperate situation. He was silent again, his gaze unwavering, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, feel him assessing her, judging her. It was an unnerving sensation, almost as if he was trying to decipher the entirety of her life story from her disheveled appearance and her trembling voice. The seconds stretched into an eternity, filled with the unspoken questions and the palpable tension between them. Then, he finally spoke again, his voice still low, but with a hint of something she couldn't quite place, perhaps a touch of exasperation, or maybe just a deep weariness. "You can't just sit here all night. It's too cold, and this road isn't safe for a woman alone." Her heart leaped into her throat. Was this the moment? Was he going to tell her to come inside? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her veins. I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I have no one to call." He shifted his weight, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't just neutral observation. It wasn't kindness, not exactly, but it wasn't hostility either. It was a kind of grim pragmatism. "You got two options, lady. You wait for morning and hope someone drives by, or you come inside. We got a phone, and it's warmer." The offer, though seemingly practical, felt like a trap. Her mind screamed no, conjuring images of every dark tale she'd ever heard about places like this, about men like him. But her body, shivering uncontrollably from the cold that was now seeping into the car, yearned for warmth. Her desperation wrestled with her fear, an agonizing internal battle. "Inside," she repeated, her voice barely audible. The bar." He grunted again. "It's a clubhouse. And a bar. Whatever you want to call it. It's the only place for miles. No one's going to hurt you, if that's what you're thinking. Not in here." His last words carried a subtle emphasis, a quiet warning that somehow felt both reassuring and deeply unsettling. It implied an unspoken code, a set of rules she knew nothing about, but also a potential danger from outside. She hesitated, her gaze darting from his unreadable face to the dark, foreboding building across the road, then back to the dead dashboard of her car. The thought of walking into that place, into the heart of a Hells Angels clubhouse, sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. But the alternative, freezing alone in her dead car on a deserted road until dawn, felt equally, if not more, terrifying. What if no one came? What if someone worse than these men found her? I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have kids. I need to be safe." He rubbed his beard, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if considering her words. "You think you're safer out here? Alone? On this road? With a dead car and no phone?" His tone was still calm, but there was an edge to it now, a subtle challenge that pointed out the undeniable logic of his argument. We're not animals, lady. We got rules. You come in, you can make a call. We'll even see if one of the guys knows anything about cars. But you ain't gonna get no help sitting here." His words, blunt and unvarnished, chipped away at her resolve. He was right. She was utterly helpless. Her fear of the unknown, of the notorious reputation of the Hells Angels, was immense. But her fear of being stranded, of failing her children, was even greater. She thought of Lily's persistent cough, of the doctor's bills, of the precarious balance of their lives. She couldn't afford to be stuck here, to miss work, to compound her problems. "Okay," she said, the word a small, fragile sound in the vast silence. "Okay. Thank you." She didn't know if she was thanking him for the offer or for simply not being immediately hostile. He gave another grunt, a curt nod. "Pop the hood. I'll take a look before you come in. No sense in dragging you inside if it's just a loose wire." He turned and walked back to the front of the car, leaving Sarah to wrestle with the heavy door handle and the even heavier weight of her decision. With a shaky hand, she reached down and pulled the lever, hearing the faint click as the hood latch released. She pushed open her door, the rusty hinges groaning in protest, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet night. The cold air hit her face, crisp and biting, carrying the faint scent of diesel and the stronger, more immediate smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke from across the road. She stepped out, her legs feeling like jelly, her eyes scanning the dark surroundings, half expecting other figures to emerge from the shadows. The biker was already at the front of her car, his large hands easily lifting the hood. He peered inside, a powerful flashlight suddenly appearing in his hand, its beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the greasy, complex machinery of the engine. She watched him, still wary, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to ward off both the cold and the gnawing fear. He didn't speak, simply poked and prodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. The light from his flashlight cast dancing shadows on his face, making him look even more formidable. After a few minutes, he straightened up, shaking his head slowly. "Nah. This ain't no loose wire, lady. This is deeper. Sounds like the timing belt, maybe the water pump. Whatever it is, it's not a roadside fix. You'll need a tow." His diagnosis, delivered with a grim finality, confirmed her worst fears. The car was well and truly dead. He looked at her, his expression still unreadable, but now with a hint of something that might have been pity. Or perhaps just a recognition of her dire predicament. "So, you coming in, or you gonna freeze out here?" he repeated, the offer now less a choice and more an unavoidable necessity. Sarah looked at the dark building, the flickering neon sign, the cluster of motorcycles, and the faint, menacing sounds emanating from within. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to stay away. But her rational mind, fueled by desperation and the cold, told her there was no other option. She had to take the chance. She had to trust that this enigmatic stranger, this Hell's Angel, would indeed adhere to his rules. "I'll come in," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a surrender. She felt a profound sense of dread, a terrifying step into the unknown, but also a faint, desperate spark of hope. As she took her first hesitant step towards the bar, she glanced back at her dead car, a symbol of her broken life, then ahead to the flickering red sign, a beacon of terrifying uncertainty. She had no idea what awaited her inside. The night was far from over, and her ordeal had only just begun. The cold bit at Sarah's exposed skin as she walked, her steps hesitant, each crunch of gravel beneath her worn shoes echoing in the vast silence of the night. The large biker, whose name she didn't know and dared not ask, strode ahead with an unhurried confidence, his heavy boots making a more substantial sound. He didn't look back, simply assumed she would follow. The flickering red neon sign, which had seemed so menacing from the safety of her car, now pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm, drawing her closer to the dimly lit entrance. As they approached, the muffled sounds from inside grew louder, the low throb of classic rock, the clinking of glasses, and the rough, booming laughter of men. Sarah's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. This was it. She was walking into the lion's den, relying on the word of a man whose very presence radiated danger. She swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of fear. The biker pushed open the heavy wooden door, revealing a cavernous interior bathed in a smoky, amber glow. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer, cigarettes, and something else, a musky, metallic odor she couldn't quite place, but which added to the oppressive atmosphere. Several heads turned as they entered, a sea of grizzled faces, tattooed arms, and leather vests. The music seemed to momentarily dip, and a hush, subtle but noticeable, fell over the room. Sarah felt every pair of eyes on her, scrutinizing, judging, dissecting. Her cheeks flushed, and she instinctively wrapped her arms tighter around herself, trying to make herself smaller, less visible. The large biker, her unsolicited escort, didn't seem to notice the sudden shift in atmosphere. He simply walked to a quieter corner of the bar, a small, worn wooden table tucked away from the main commotion. He gestured to one of the chairs with a tilt of his head. "Sit." His voice was the same low rumble, devoid of inflection, yet carrying an undeniable command. Sarah obeyed, her legs feeling weak as she sank onto the hard chair. She kept her gaze fixed on the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The big man then turned to the bar, exchanging a few gruff words with the burly bartender, who nodded and poured 2 glasses of water. One was placed in front of Sarah, the other in front of the biker. He then pulled up a chair opposite her, his large frame almost dwarfing the small table. He didn't speak, just sat there, his presence a heavy, silent weight. The initial scrutiny from the other bikers slowly subsided. The music picked up again, the conversations resumed, and the clinking of glasses returned. Sarah risked a quick glance around the room. The decor was sparse, functional, and distinctly masculine. There were pool tables, a dartboard, and faded photographs tacked to the walls, depicting groups of men on motorcycles, their faces obscured by time and distance. The overall impression was one of a closed community, a private world into which she had unwittingly stumbled. "Phones on the bar," the biker finally said, breaking the silence. "Behind the register. It's a landline. We don't do cell service in here, too many dead zones out this far." Sarah looked at him, then at the bar, which seemed a mile away, populated by stern-faced men. The thought of walking up there, of having to ask for the phone, filled her with renewed dread. I don't have anyone to call," she admitted, the lie feeling hollow even as she spoke it. She had her mother, but she couldn't bear to bring her into this, to explain where she was. Her mother would panic. The biker raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Everyone's got someone to call, lady. Or a tow truck. What's your plan?" His tone was still pragmatic, cutting through her evasiveness. "I don't have AAA, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "And I don't have money for a tow. Not right now." The humiliation was palpable, burning her cheeks. She was laying bare her entire desperate situation to this intimidating stranger. He grunted, leaning back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her worn clothes, her tired eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. "So, you just planning on staying here, then?" There was no malice in his voice, just a blunt statement of fact. "No, of course not," she said quickly, a fresh wave of panic rising. I don't know what to do. My kids are with my mother tonight, but I have to get back for them in the morning. I have work." He took a slow sip of his water, his eyes still on her. "Kids, huh?" It wasn't a question, more of a statement, a new piece of information he was processing. "How far's your place?" "About 40 miles, she replied, surprised by his continued questions. "Back towards the city." He nodded slowly, then looked towards the bar again, his gaze lingering on the bartender. After a moment, he pushed himself up from the table. "Stay here. Don't wander." The command was clear, and Sarah had no intention of disobeying. He walked over to the bar, his conversation with the bartender low and hushed. Sarah watched, her heart still hammering, trying to decipher their expressions, their gestures. They glanced her way a few times, but their faces remained unreadable. After a few minutes, the big man returned, a key in his hand. "All right," he said, sitting back down. "Bartender's name is Snake. He's got a pickup. He's off shift in an hour. He can take you and your car to the nearest garage in the morning. For now, you can sleep in the back room. It's not much, just a cot, but it's warm and safe. And there's a phone back there too, if you change your mind about calling someone." Sarah stared at him, dumbfounded. A garage? A ride? A place to sleep? It was so far beyond anything she had dared to hope for. "But I don't have any money," she stammered, fearing this was a setup, a debt she couldn't repay. He waved a dismissive hand. "Snake's got a soft spot for strays, especially mothers. Just pay him what you can, when you can. For the tow, you owe him a favor. He'll let you know when he needs it." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. "Probably just wants someone to help him clean out his garage or something. Don't worry about it." A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, washed over Sarah. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and stinging. She tried to speak, but her voice was thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much." He grunted again, seeming uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Rules, lady. We don't leave people stranded. Especially women with kids. Not on our watch." He stood up. "Come on. I'll show you to the back room. You can call your mother from there. It's quieter." He led her through a narrow, dimly lit hallway behind the bar. The hallway was lined with more photographs, these of men with younger faces, their arms around each other, a sense of camaraderie radiating from the faded prints. They passed a cluttered kitchen, then a small, windowless room. Inside, there was a worn cot with a thin blanket, a small table, and an old rotary phone on the wall. The air was warmer here, still smelling faintly of smoke and beer, but less oppressive than the main bar. "Here you go," he said, gesturing to the cot. "Bathroom's just down the hall, second door on the left. Lock the door when you're in here. No one will bother you." He handed her a small, folded blanket. "It gets cold at night. This'll help." Sarah took the blanket, her fingers brushing against his large, calloused hand. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice still thick. "Really? Thank you." He nodded curtly, then turned to leave. Just before he stepped out, he paused. "Name's Bear, by the way." And with that, the intimidating Hell's Angel, the man who had silently risen from the shadows, disappeared, leaving her alone in the small, safe room. Sarah stared at the closed door for a moment, then at the rotary phone. Bear. A fitting name for such a large, silent protector. The shock of the evening, the fear, the unexpected kindness, all swirled within her. She sank onto the cot, the thin mattress offering surprisingly little comfort, but the warmth of the room was a blessing. She took a deep, shaky breath, and for the first time in hours, she felt the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed her mother's number. It rang several times before her mother's sleepy voice answered, laced with concern. "Sarah? What's wrong? Is everything all right?" "Mom, it's me," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's okay. My car broke down, but I'm safe. I'm at a place where I can get help. I'll explain everything in the morning. Just wanted you to know I'm all right, and I'll be there as soon as I can for the kids." Her mother, though clearly worried, seemed to accept her vague explanation, trusting Sarah's assurance of safety. They spoke for a few more minutes, Sarah reassuring her mother that Lily's cough wasn't worse, that she had a place to stay, and that she would call again in the morning with more concrete plans. Hanging up the phone, Sarah felt another wave of relief. Her children were safe, her mother knew she was safe, and a plan, however unconventional, was in motion. She lay down on the cot, pulling the thin blanket over herself. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed the events of the night, the sputtering engine, the dead phone, the terrifying symbol of the winged skull, Bear's silent approach, and his gruff, unexpected kindness. She had come face to face with her worst fears, only to find an unexpected sanctuary. The next morning, the sounds of the bar were different. Gone was the heavy rock music, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation. Sarah emerged from the back room, feeling surprisingly rested, though still a little wary. The air in the main bar was clearer, the lingering smell of smoke less potent. A few men were at the bar, drinking coffee, not beer. Snake, the bartender, was a stocky man with a neatly trimmed beard and surprisingly gentle eyes. He offered her a cup of hot coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Bear told me about your situation," he said, his voice softer than she'd expected. "Don't worry about the tow. We'll get your car to Jimmy's garage. He's fair, and he knows these old Fords. He'll give you a good price on the repairs." Sarah ate, her stomach rumbling with gratitude, the food a welcome comfort after the night's ordeal. She explained her financial situation, her struggle to keep everything afloat. Snake listened patiently, nodding occasionally. "Look," he said, "we're not charity, but we're not heartless either. You pay what you can, when you can. Jimmy knows the drill. He'll fix your car, and you can work out a payment plan with him. As for the ride home, I'll take you after we drop the car at the garage. It's on my way." As she finished her breakfast, Bear walked in, his presence still formidable, but now imbued with a different kind of authority, one of quiet competence and unexpected generosity. He didn't say much, just nodded at her, then spoke to Snake about the car. It was clear that her plight had become a collective concern, a problem to be solved by this unconventional brotherhood. By mid-morning, Sarah was in the passenger seat of Snake's battered but reliable pickup truck, her Ford Focus hitched to the back. The sun was rising higher, casting long shadows across the industrial zone she had driven through last night. The world looked different in the light of day, less menacing, more ordinary. She glanced back at the Hells Angels clubhouse, the red neon sign now dark and faded in the daylight. It looked less like a den of danger and more like a simple, somewhat dilapidated building. Snake drove silently, occasionally pointing out landmarks, engaging in small talk that was surprisingly easy. He told her about Jimmy's garage, about the local area, about how the club had been there for decades. He never once made her feel like a burden, or that she owed him anything beyond a simple, future favor. When they reached Jimmy's garage, a no-frills establishment on the outskirts of the city, Snake introduced her to Jimmy, a gruff but kind-faced mechanic who seemed to be on familiar terms with the Hells Angels. Jimmy quickly assessed her car, confirming Bear's initial diagnosis of a timing belt and water pump issue. "It's a big job, Sarah," Jimmy said, "but we'll get it running right. Snake told me your situation. Don't worry about the upfront cost. We'll get you back on the road, and you pay me when you can. We'll work something out." Sarah felt a fresh surge of gratitude, a profound sense of wonder at the unexpected kindness she had encountered. These men, whom she had feared, had not only ensured her safety but had also provided a practical solution to her seemingly insurmountable problems. They had seen her vulnerability, not as an opportunity, but as a call for help, a situation that triggered their own unspoken code. Snake then drove her the rest of the way home, dropping her off at her mother's house. Her children came running out, Lily's cough much improved, their faces lighting up at the sight of her. Sarah hugged them tight, a wave of profound relief washing over her. She was home. She was safe. Later that day, as she recounted the unbelievable story to her mother, Sarah found herself reflecting on the night. Her life was still a challenging tightrope walk, the bills still a mountain, her job still demanding. But something had shifted. She had faced her deepest fears and found strength in the most unexpected place. The Hells Angels, the symbols of everything she had been taught to fear, had become her unlikely saviors. The experience had not erased her struggles, but it had given her a new perspective. It had taught her that help could come from anywhere, from anyone, and that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. It had shown her that beneath the hardened exteriors, complex codes of conduct and unexpected compassion could reside. She still had to figure out how to pay for the car repairs, how to keep juggling her responsibilities, but now, she knew she wasn't entirely alone. She had a debt of gratitude to repay, a favor to return, and a story that would forever challenge her understanding of the world and the people in it. The night had been terrifying, but it had also been a profound lesson in resilience, human connection, and the surprising places where true help can be found.